Hi, I'm Diane Harris with Quiltmaker, and today I'm going to show you an easy and effective way to make a basic quilt label. I usually make my quilt labels using Word on the computer, and I start out by just picking a font that's really cute. And here you can see an example of where I just played with some fonts. I just mess around until I find one that I really like. Sometimes I look for something that kind of goes with the mood of the quilt, and you can play around with that. And then I love the convenience of already prepared fabric sheets for the printer. I really like the EQ printables. There are many other brands though, and you can play around with what you like and what works well in your inkjet printer. This is interesting. Now they actually have other fabrics besides just a basic cotton. This is a linen fabric, and there's also silk and satin. So those are other things to mess around with. So I compose my labels with basic information about who the quilt's for and who it was made by. I usually use my whole name, and I usually put a place and a date. And because the fabric sheets can be expensive, I try to use up the whole sheet when I'm making labels. So I might make the one that's specific to the project I'm working on, and then down here I usually make generic labels, just made for you with love by Diane Harris 2015. So I might have some generic labels also, just because I don't want to waste the rest of that sheet. So then I get ready by cutting the printed part to size, and I usually always leave at least ½ inch between the lettering and the cut edge, because remember, you're going to take ½ inch off for seam allowance. So you need ½ inch for seam allowance, and then at least ½ inch of breathing space. So ½ inch is the bare minimum that you want to leave around the words. So then once you've done that, you can go ahead and peel the paper off of the fabric, and you're ready to start. So then I choose a fabric for my label that kind of goes with the quilt, and I cut some strips. Usually I cut them about 1½ inches. These are 1½, and I cut 4 little strips. And what I'm going to do is sew those around the label. So I usually sew them on the sides first, and then I trim those even, and then I add strips to the top and the bottom. So there you go, we're all framed up. And then I cut another fabric that's just a little bit larger, and this fabric I usually make it match the backing of the quilt, and you'll see why in just a second. So what I'm going to do here is put the label and this lining fabric right sides together, and I'll use a ruler and a rotary cutter, and I'll trim everything up to size. So I would trim those little edges off and then trim the yellow fabric even here. So I'm all ready to go. And then I'm gonna, here you can see I have the label and the yellow, and I've sewn ½ inch all the way around. And I used dark thread so that you could see it in the demonstration, but in reality you would use a lighter thread. So I sew all the way around. It doesn't matter if you sew off and then start and sew again, or if you put your needle down here at ½ inch and pivot. Either way works just fine. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is turn it over, and on the lining side I'm going to take a scissors and I'm going to cut a slit in the lining, about 3 inches long or so. You can see I've cut a slit in that lining. So then I'm going to turn it inside out, just like so, and I'll use something like a point turner or a not too blunt scissors, or not too pointed scissors, a little bit blunt, and push out those edges. So that gives me this. I've pushed out those edges just a little bit, and see, it's totally fine that you have this slit here, because you're going to basically applique this to the back of your quilt. So then I just hand stitch this to the back of the quilt. You can kind of do a whip stitch, or you can, if you know how to applique, you can use an applique stitch to put it on the back of the quilt. So now you can see why I choose this fabric to match the backing, because that's right up next to the backing, and so that way if you have a little bit of this going on where some of that yellow shows through, it matches the backing, so it doesn't really matter too much. It still looks really nice. Sometimes if I want to give it a little more of a finished look, I will do a straight stitch all the way around here, and that gives a nice finished look to the label too. You can also use this method if you just handwrite a label, so you don't have to print this on the computer. If you're more comfortable just writing the label by hand, you can certainly do that too. There are a lot of printed fabric labels out there now with cute motifs, and then the idea is that you write by hand on here, and I prepare those the same way. I chose fabric that matched this printed label, and I added my strips all the way around, and then did the lining and cut the slit in the back. So you can use it to prepare these pre-printed labels too. Same thing here, I cut it more in the end. Doesn't really matter. So you're going to apply that to the back of the quilt. It's just a really simple, easy, and effective way to make a quilt label.